Hello, and welcome to this video documenting my progress on my acoustic guitar build thus far. Basically, I'm going to be walking through all of the individual pieces that I've made so far, more or less how I made them, and just kind of showing what I've done so far. So the first thing that I made was this bending iron. So this bending iron is necessary because you need to bend some wood in order to make a guitar. Guitars are not square. So basically this was used to make the sides of my guitar. I use this to make the bracing because I'm doing falcate bracing, which is not like the traditional X bracing, and that necessitates bending wood. And I use this to help make the rosette, and I will use this when lining the inside of my guitar with kerfing and putting the edge binding on as well. And so essentially this bending iron consists of a hot metal pipe, a electric charcoal lighter, and a dimmer switch to adjust the temperature of the electric charcoal lighter. And all that's wired in and heat shrunk tubing and electrical taped in here. And so this works pretty well. It's probably a little fancier than it needed to be honest, but I'm happy I made it, and it made a lot of the steps easier than they otherwise could have been. So the next thing that I made was I CNC'd a form for the guitar body / sides. So there's the outer mold, and then here is the inner mold. And so these two pieces of wood create the shape of the guitar. It looks like a guitar, right? And so here the idea is that I can use this outer mold with the bending iron to form the guitar sides, and then this inner mold is there just to be basically a glorified clamp. And this piece is really heavy, and if I was going to make this again, I would do that differently. Probably making this hollow or something else, because it's ridiculously heavy. And this was made just using 4 different pieces with some spacers. And same thing for the body. And so one thing to note on this is that the distance between here and here, effectively the kerf of this slot, is exactly the width of the guitar sides. And the reason you do that is because you want to have even clamping pressure all the way around. Because if you had a bigger gap here than you have here, well, there's going to be more clamping pressure here than here. And so that's an important thing to have. Oh, it's so heavy. And then here's the guitar side. So how I made this is you get this nice and wet. I also just put wet paper towels around it to help protect the wood from being burned, which more or less worked. There's a couple burn marks, but it's okay. It's my first guitar. And so you use this with the bending iron. So the bending iron's here, get this hot and wet, and then makes a nice steam sound. It's almost therapeutic. And then eventually you kind of work it into this shape by pushing it into the mold. And as you can see, it worked pretty well. It's not perfect, but do I care? No, it's good enough. So is that all I want to say about that? Yeah, it was a pretty simple process. Like reading online, the bending the sides, people were talking about cracking their sides and it's super difficult or whatever. Maybe I just got lucky, but like this was the easiest thing that I've had to do so far in this project. Like it was a cakewalk, and it was really fun. And this is the part I probably most look forward to on making a second guitar because it was just fun. Once I made the guitar sides, I started working on the bracing for the guitar. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I used a falcate style bracing system, which looks like this. This is my guitar top. And so traditionally you have an X brace, which looks something like this. There's X here, and then there's like diagonal pieces here, and then a similar kind of structure here at the top. And the advantage of having the falcate bracing is that, in theory, you really only need tension in rigidity in one direction, because you only have tension pulling this way. So there's a bending moment created by your strings, which wants to make the guitar top do this. And so you really only need stiffness to counteract this. You don't need stiffness to counteract bending in this direction. And so the falcate bracing is theoretically supposed to do that. Basically, it allows the guitar to be flexible in this direction and vibrate nicely that way, while being incredibly rigid bending like this. You probably can't tell, but I'm flexing it this way. And then I have my bridge plate here, which is, I don't even know what type of wood this is. It's possibly maple or ash or something that's really hard, which will work fine. And then each of these brace pieces here are made of 2 pieces of wood that I bent on the bending iron using these type of forms. So same idea of the guitar body. You clamp it in here, let it dry and cool, and then it retains the shape. And then I made one of these for each small, medium, and large sized braces. And then inside the brace is a piece of carbon fiber cloth. I don't remember the exact weave. It was whatever the cheapest one on Amazon was. So there's carbon fiber cloth in here that I epoxied in between those for additional strength. Yeah, I think that's as far as it goes for the bracing. You can see the back here is very, very similar. And then I have a cedar stripped piece here to help reinforce the middle. Because normally back bracing is like this, but this will hopefully give me a live back, which will contribute to the tone and the volume of the guitar by allowing the back to vibrate instead of just being rigid. But again, that's just in theory. I don't know if that's actually true. And then here's the top of the guitar. So you can see I have a rosette in here, which I CNC'd in the top. And then I've got a piece of acrylic in here that I got from some Chinese website. They came in, I think, like 6 pieces like this or whatever. But it's really beautiful. I think it looks really good. It was a bit tricky to install because this is a different material than the wood. Obviously, plastic and wood are not the same material. So sanding them flush and then smooth and not having it scratched up and looking like trash was pretty tricky. It took a really long time. So if I was going to do this again, I probably wouldn't use the plastic material, although it does look really good. And then it's a Indian rosewood binding that I just did by hand with the bending iron to get it in the shape of a circle. And then you'll also notice that, I'm not sure how well this will show up on the camera, but a guitar top is not flat. So there is a slight, you can see from there, so there's a slight dome to it. It's more exaggerated on the back. And so I went to a luthier, shout out to Portland Guitars. I went and Jay and his son helped me using their dishes to create that dome shape. Basically because I was too lazy to do the 16-hour CNC job or whatever it would have been to make that dish myself. So moving on to the fretboard. So a fretboard is not flat on the top. There's different radiuses you can choose. I chose to go with the 16-inch radius because I don't know what I'm doing, and people were talking about 12 and 20, and I was like, okay, well, what's in between those? 16? Sure, we'll do 16. I'd probably go with a steeper one, having read up on it a bit more now, because that makes bar chords easier. But I already ordered my nut, and so I just went with the one that would work with my nut. So 16-inch radius on the inside of this. This is a sanding block here to put that radius on. And so basically I put my fretboard, I double stickied my fretboard down to the table. I put 2 kind of tracks like this of Delrin, which is a smooth plastic. And then I kind of ran the sanding block up and down for like 5 hours. Maybe not 5 hours. It was at least 3 hours. It really sucked. It took a long time. But eventually I have a really nice smooth radius on the top of my fretboard. And then I CNC'd this taper into it, and then CNC'd these pockets for the inlays here. And then these inlays are acrylic, same as the rosette. But I used a laser cutter to cut out them instead of the CNC. Mostly because they're so small that the CNC would probably just break them off. And the laser cutter worked pretty good. The laser cutter I didn't use the laser cutter for the rosette because when you laser cut plastic, it melts the plastic slightly, and you end up with not a 90-degree cut. And I wanted a perfectly 90-degree cut for the rosette because any sort of error is going to be more exaggerated in this larger piece of material than in these tiny little dots, basically. And then when I was CNCing the taper, I had it slightly cockeye in the CNC, so instead of everything square like this, it was just boop, like maybe like, I don't know, 5 degrees off. And so my radius is no longer perfectly even across, so it's actually a little bit thicker on the high E string side, which is really lucky because that's the side that it probably matters the least on. But it's not perfect, which makes me sad, but it's probably fine. And I can try to fix it later if I need to. And then these fret slots, I used a laser cutter to do that. And so I had about 4 inches extra of material that I just cut off. I could have cut even more off, this is longer than I need, to do practice. So I did about 10 or 11 practice fret slots to try to figure out how deep I wanted them to be and then how wide, just for the fret wire that I had. And that worked really, really well, actually. It's really clean, and I was able to pretty consistently get the fret wire in very nicely. So then, let me move these out of the way. We have our neck. So the neck, this is the neck blank. I CNC'd this exact taper, so it's a perfect match in here. And then I also CNC'd a little tiny slot for the nut. I think this will end up being deeper, but I didn't know how much deeper, so I just basically created the start of the channel so that I can come back with a file later and I know where to go. This also helps me index where the fretboard is relative to the neck, which is really important to know. And so this taper, because I CNC both with the same CNC and the same DXF file, is exactly the same. So when I glue this on, this will be a perfect match. I have my truss rod inlaid. I cut this channel with the CNC at the same time, and then I cut this little filler strip here. I was a little hesitant to try to make this flush because it's like, well, if I screw up and it's a little bit proud, that's a really big problem relative to it being shallow. So I was like, oh, I'll just make it a little bit shallow on purpose, and then I can pretty easily fill this in with a strip. And then here's the profile of my head. And then I cut out this on a bandsaw, just like this. And I know it looks really ugly, but I will clean it up later and you won't be able to tell when it's done. This is like, yeah. I should have done this in a slightly different order. I should have cut this 1 inch depth. I cut the CNC 1 inch deep, basically to give myself plenty of room, but I should have cut it a lot shallower than that, which would have made the bandsawing easier to hold flat. I was able to hold it flat, but it was a little bit sketch. I guess it depends on what you would consider sketch for a bandsaw. It's all relative. And then here are the, I think this is called the tail block and then the heel block. There's a slight radius to this, which I basically just copied off of a template for my guitar sides. And so this matches very, very nicely inside the guitar sides. And that's really all that's interesting about it. It's just a piece of wood to hold stuff together. It's not fancy. This is the heel block, which is a bit more interesting because it has the mortise joint for the tenon. So it's a mortise and tenon joint. I'm going to do a bolt-on neck. You'll notice that these two don't actually fit together, and that's on purpose because I machined this on a Bridgeport mill, which is like, okay, yeah, I know that's kind of a trashy way to do it, but it worked good, so fight me. And I cut this hole for the truss rod, which fits very nicely. So it's a pretty tight fit, so I'll know if I did this like perfectly or not. Basically, if I can get this to fit in the hole, I'll be like, oh, I did this really good. If it doesn't fit in the hole, then I'll just have to drill it a little bigger. It's not a big deal. But that's a little like challenge for myself. Is if I can get this to fit in that hole when everything's put together, like, oh man, that's gonna be really good. And then there's 2 holes for the 1/4 inch bolts. But as I was saying earlier, I made this slightly smaller than this. I cut this slot just on a table saw. I don't have like a handheld router with a bit that I can follow a template on, and I'm not gonna buy one because I'm 22. I don't know where I'm gonna live or anything. This doesn't make sense to purchase that at this point in my life. And then the school didn't have one, so it's like, okay, well, I just did a table saw. So I cut a bunch of individual strokes. You can kind of see the leftover from that. I'm not sure how much I'm going to bother to clean that up because you'll never see it, so I don't care. And structurally it won't make a difference. But I left a little bit more material in there because I'm assuming there's going to be some error in how this is angled inside the guitar body. And because I've already cut this, that could be a big problem. And so I want to have enough material to, like, if this is off by like 2 or 3 degrees, to be able to compensate for that in this. So I need to have extra material in that. And that's pretty much where I'm at. I'm about to glue up the guitar body either tonight or tomorrow morning. Put the sides together. And yeah, it's a fun project. I'm learning a lot. Thanks for watching.